Welcome to the Reasons to Reason podcast. I'm your host and captain, Sal Galati. This is the show that's going to talk about all the things we're not supposed to: God, religion, and politics. So strap in, prepare to get offended, and maybe, just maybe, our nation can learn how to reason again. I have a friend here. His name's Ilya Zlotnik. We'll talk about kind of how we met. We agree on some things, but we disagree on a lot of things, and pretty passionately. And I'm hoping we're going to have a cool conversation as a result. So Ilya is someone I met actually through my dad. He's a financial planner. He could talk to the extent he wants to about that. And after kind of working some stuff through with my dad, we started having conversations on the phone. And like I always do, I brought him to the matters that, that no one wants to talk about: God, religion, and politics. And he's been able to hang in there with me for the last couple of years. I think he's annoyed with me a lot of the time, but he agreed to come in and do this. And we're going to see if we could have a lovely conversation. So, Ilya, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sal, annoyed is a strong word, but no, I do appreciate the invites. I'm honored to be here. You and I have had a lot of in-depth, no holds bar, straight to the point conversations over the years that have not been recorded. So hopefully we'll be able to my knowledge, but hopefully we'll be able to do it justice today and have a great conversation on what it seems to be very varying topics.
All right, so I got some stuff I wanted to start off with because I think it's important. Ilya's culturally Jewish, but I wanted to have a conversation of what that really means. I hate the labels: Republican, Democrat, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, atheist. You don't know a ton about the person just based on that word. You only going to get to know someone by talking to them and sum it up.
As it relates to being Jewish, for me, I was born in the former Soviet Union in 1984, which is now Minsk, Belarus. Moved in 89 because I was Jewish, and there was a path to move to the U.S. legally at that time. And the thing about being born in the former Soviet Union is you couldn't really practice your religion. So Jews lived amongst other Jews. The Judaism as a way to bond with other Jews was very important. Marry other Jews. That was something that was very important to my parents when I was growing up. But religion wasn't, because we never practiced religion. We didn't have Shabbat. We didn't go to temple because it was outlawed. So, when we moved to the U.S., we tried to get involved in more of the religious aspect of things. We became members of a temple. I got bar mitzvahed, and, we would go to temple on high holidays. But really what stuck with me is kind of this unspoken bond amongst Jews. Because of that, less so the religious aspect of going to temple, whether that's right or wrong, and the actual believing God portion of it, because I'm more secular. I am secular from that perspective. But now that I have kids, I kind of see the importance of bringing kids to temple and having them involved in the traditional aspect of Judaism.
Thanks for sharing it. And I've noticed it in talking to people coming from former Soviet Union. God is beaten out of you by design. We talked about it in Marx's Lie versus Jesus' Truth. Really, in order for Marxism to take hold, you have to get rid of any worship of anything more important than the state. So I feel like it's been persecuted out of people, beaten out of people. One observation is that, many Jews are, people would say, culturally Jewish, and they're united in this identity. Instead of uniting in the God that made the nation, they're united in their nationhood. I'm taking it a step back, I guess, from who God made them, called them to be, and argue without God, it wouldn't even exist. We've had conversation. We're not going to do that now. I kind of explained to you where the word Israel comes from. Biblically, it's a person, right? There's Jacob, who descended from Abraham. His name was turned to Israel. From there, he had sons, and those are the tribes of Israel. Little Bible history. Setting us up for a conversation. One area where we disagree quite a bit is Donald Trump. And he's a polarizing figure, and we're going to talk about that. But I want to start with a quote from Cicero. And why I'm bringing him up is one of the first conversations Ilya and I had, and we were kind of reviewing our memory here before the show, was his appreciation for Stoicism. Cicero was a Stoic, but he had a quote that I find interesting and very relevant. A nation can survive its fools and even the ambitious, but it cannot survive treason from within. An enemy at the gates is less formidable, for he is known and carries his banner openly. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, for sure.
So what I think we disagree is Donald Trump. Is he the enemy from within? I'd argue he's not. Ilya, I would argue, thinks he is. The question I asked Ilya a while back, and I never got an answer. He had said that he investigated Trump for himself and came to the conclusion he was a very bad man, and actually said he was a threat to democracy. And he said he came to this conclusion without even considering really what the media said. I couldn't believe that someone could come up with the phrase threat to democracy without consuming the media. My question was that I never got an answer to, when the attempt on his life happened, Were you happy he survived or upset?
Well, before I answer that question, I mean, you made some conjectures around my view on Trump, which I would like to clarify. I will say that now that he is president, I wish him the best, and I hope that he fulfills his duties as honorably as best as he can, because I'm a citizen of the United States. I love the U.S.
Amen.
I only want the best for the country. It's a good, interesting question you have. I think I felt at that moment shock and indifference, because at the end of the day, although I in the past was not the biggest fan of Trump, and we can talk about why, I wasn't sure that necessarily another leader would have done a better job. If you look at really the other person, Kamala Harris, it wasn't as if I was so certain that she was a better candidate. So I just wanted to let, I guess, history run its course.
Back to the point, though, calling someone a threat to democracy is quite a statement. Mm-hmm. I mean, if someone I perceived was a threat to democracy and reaching the presidency, I think I'd be content if they were eliminated. That's where I'm confused, I guess.
All right, well, let's talk about the comment that I made about Trump being a threat to democracy. A lot of that had to do with January 6th. From my vantage point, in the actions that he took on that date, it seemed like he instigated a mob of followers who were willing to effectively die on his word to take siege of Capitol Hill.
And 4 years later, are you still as convinced that it happened as portrayed in the media?
I have not been given any reason to think any differently.
We could do another show on that one. I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole. One of the reasons I brought you on is like money conversation. You're a financial planner. You look at these things way more than I do. I'm going to give you my layman's take on some of these items. The Fed. We do these massive spending bills now, but there's never an increase in the level of taxation directly. And my argument is, if we wanted to send billions of dollars to Ukraine, for example, we would send everyone an invoice, or at least lay it out in the media, like what this will cause the average taxpayer directly. Like you get a bill. We're sending out a bill, and then let's see what the public opinion is. When you're just borrowing the money and it doesn't cost anyone directly, public opinion is very different when it doesn't hit them in the pocketbook. That said, I think people have finally realized the gig is up. It is costing them. It's costing them in a sense of inflation. Mm-hmm. But that's not as direct. And people, because they keep the population ignorant, quite frankly, and they don't understand where the inflation is coming from, it's like, oh, the inflation is because of Putin. The inflation is not because of Putin. The inflation is because we're spending money we don't have, and we're creating more money in the supply, right? So it's worth less and less. To me, if I could do what the Fed do, I'd be in jail. Which is what? They loan money that doesn't exist, but they charge cold hard cash interest. That's quite a racket. And I want people to understand that cold hard interest that's now, I think, exceeding $1 trillion a year. Mm-hmm. That's money that's not going to go to infrastructure, not going to go to education, not going to go to healthcare, not going to go to defense. California is burning out of control. It's not global warming. It's incompetence. It's incompetence. It's lack of infrastructure. It's lack of water. It's lack of resources. Where am I off on that?
I don't think you're necessarily off at all. Well, the few things as it relates to Trump, just to tie that back, there's one thing that I am excited about from his presidency's perspective is him bringing in Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk to head up DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. I mean, if there's anybody in history that I think is up to this type of task, and Elon Musk is one man that could potentially tackle it. Can he cut out $2 trillion worth of fat? I'm suspect of that. But I definitely think he can make things more efficient. I mean, he is ultimately the king of efficiency and operating the most complex, difficult businesses on the face of the earth. One thing I like to do is I like to take a step back and look at things more from a 50,000-foot view and look at history and where America plays a role in great empires that have been in certain similar situations. What we're going through is very similar of other great empires.
I want to interject with one correction. We're not an empire. We're supposed to be a republic. It's a fallacy because we're acting like an empire. We're a republic, and we need to start acting like it.
And that's fair. And maybe one of the reasons that empires fail is because they're empires. They try to go too far.
They overextend themselves.
They overextend themselves. But historically, what happens is a nation doesn't start off prosperous, right? A nation typically starts off poor. And the ones that make it to the top make it through frugality, savings, hard work, the right types of immigration.
I'd argue it's similar to like a family coming to this nation. You see this cycle happen in the family where you have immigrant parents, very hungry, ambitious, willing to take sacrifices, willing to take risks, and their priority is not so much them's well-being, it's the well-being of the future generations. And then you attain the success, and so many times then, because that generation didn't go through that work, they squander it. So we can see it on a family scale. I think we're seeing it in our nation scale. Freedom and liberty, prosperity, because many of the people in our generation have never had to deal with anything else. We don't know how good we got it, and we're squandering it.
Yeah, I mean, that's 100% right. But really the big difference between that example between the family and the nation is where it comes down to having the military might as well as being the reserve currency. So whereas an individual family can grow their wealth and pass it down to future generations, and the future generations might squander it, once they get to a point of taking on enough debt, nobody's going to give them more debt, and they're going to go bankrupt, and they'll lose it.
Where the U.S. is able to borrow money ad nauseum.
And, what's interesting is our federal debt continues to skyrocket. We keep increasing our debt limit. It seems like every quarter or a couple times a year, there's that issue in Congress to increase the debt limit. And you'd think, well, how can we continue to do this? And then also not only that, but maintain very reasonable interest rate. You could borrow money. The U.S. can borrow money right now at 5% for 30 years. That's remarkable. So what that tells me is that even though we're having these issues with debt, if you compare us to every other nation in the world, we're still the best.
And that would be because we are the reserve currency, to the extent we could keep that status.
Well, it's less so about we are the reserve currency because we have the strongest military and we have the greatest economic engine.
I'd make an argument that we have the American citizen. The American citizen that has always put that on their back. We have a culture here that traditionally has been steeped in Judeo-Christian Western values, where we love one another, we sacrifice, we give. We've always done that as a nation. The average American citizen is not taken seriously when we have this conversation. Who's in the military? Is it the politicians' kids in the military? Is it the elite genius professors' kids in the military? To the most part, it's the middle class, working class people's kids that are overseas in all kinds of nations all over the world, allowing us to have this privilege to borrow and spend money in an out-of-control fashion. That's my take. Get back to my little analogy of the Fed and how it acts like it does something I think would be criminal if anyone else does it. Loan money that doesn't exist, but charge cold hard cash.
Well, I mean, it's just the natural process. I mean, you're talking about, can you raise taxes? Unfortunately, politically, taxes are unpalatable. You're not going to get elected on the platform of raising taxes.
But if we did it the way our founders intended, where people saw the cost and say, hey, if you really want to do this, family, here's what it's going to cost you. You still want to do it. If we don't have that conversation, how is it going to stop?
A couple of weeks ago, Elon Musk and Vivek kind of put a wrench into the whole debt-raising package by actually reading it. Yeah. Right? And disclosing it to the public.
Yeah, here's an observation. They've had plenty of time to work on this thing. It's always the same scam. I mean, how many times we're going to fall for it? A few days before the deadline, they roll out 1,500 pages that seemingly came out of nowhere. Obviously, they've been working on this for months and months and months. They just don't disclose it to the American people because we're idiots. What the hell do we have to know? We're just paying the bill through inflation, through our kids' blood overseas in conflicts all over the world. Trump has forced these conversations. Dave Chappelle had a bit, he pretty much summed up Trump like this. He was in on it in his whole career. He knew how it all worked. And he just came out of the room and said, yeah, all these things you think they're doing, yeah, they're doing it. And he allowed the average American citizen into the deal, which is why I like the guy. I like him because everyone that I think is screwing the country over seems to hate him. That's inherently why I like him. He was well liked prior to him running for the presidency. Oprah liked him.
Yeah.
I got this book, Letters to Trump. It's kind of funny because you see all these people that hate the guy now writing wonderful letters about him. They hate him because he upset the system. And the system is what got us here. $35 trillion in debt, $2 trillion our budget deficit. And I think we're adding $1 trillion to the debt every 100 days. You have anything you want to add to that one?
No, I mean, I think it'll be interesting to see as an advisor and somebody that manages money, it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds over our lifetime. For what it's worth, I think that because of the Fed's policy, I think the Fed will continue to step in anytime there's a crisis with greater infusion of cash.
I'd argue the crises are self-inflicted, like self-fulfilling. We're in a crisis. We're $35 trillion in debt.
Yeah.
With a $2 trillion budget deficit, adding $1 trillion every 100 days to the debt, That's a crisis. And a crisis isn't borrow more money.
Well,
Anytime, why is Doge getting such resistance? And it'll lead us into our next topic. There are so many people working in D.C. for different apparatuses of the government or lobbying agencies that make a ton of money off this problem. This is their business. This is why they hate Trump. This is why DC voted 95, 96% against Trump, because he's bad for their business. If these people wanted to be politicians, they should run for damn office and see if they could get elected. But instead they go, no, I'll just work in these various agencies and be political versus actually being an expert and saying the truth. I'll let you kind of finish that up because that'll segue into our next topic.
Yeah, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of entrenched interests within the government, more than I could potentially conceive, that are trying to maintain their little square foot of power and money. And that's going to continue.
Money and power. That's what it is. I sent Ilya an article that I found interesting that essentially said that the Fed officials are worried that Trump's tariffs will cause inflation. And the text I sent Ilya was like, this is curious. So, well, first off, Trump imposed tariffs in his first term. There was zero inflation. Not zero. I mean, it was normal inflation, expected inflation that you'd have, right in line, 1.5%, 2%, which is what you want. And all it did was bring money into our treasury, and it brought an onshoring of jobs because it became less lucrative to manufacture things abroad when the tariff was imposed, which is the intent of tariff, at least as I've understood it. Were these people concerned with Green Deal spending? That is really in insane technologies. As the light comes out on this stuff, none of it really works without the government subsidy. Again, it's an assumption of the religion is true that there's man-made global climate change. I'm going to do a whole episode on that called Experts, Modern Day False Prophets, where I go through prophecy after prophecy of the experts on the climate over the last 50 years. Some of them saying there was going to be an ice age, some of them saying all kinds of things. None of them have come to pass. That all said, were they worried about COVID spending well after the emergency, well after the pandemic? I mean, Biden passed the COVID bill when everything was kind of resolved, of massive spending. Were they concerned that was going to cause inflation? Were they concerned that the Ukraine spending was going to cause inflation? Were they concerned that hamstringing energy production and increasing energy costs were going to increase inflation? They didn't seem to be concerned about any of those things. Same experts, when inflation started running, said, oh, it's transitory, temporary thing, it's going to work itself out. That was a lie. My argument is, are these people truly experts and working in our best interest, which is advising our politicians on what's right, advising the public on what's right? Or are they really political animals that know they couldn't get elected, but they infest these agencies, portray themselves as experts, and only make political proclamation?
Well, I mean, I think it's debatable whether or not Trump's policies during his first term caused inflation. There's anecdotal stuff that I could share about certain clients that I had that were developers, as an example, and talked about how the price of their raw materials skyrocketed because of certain tariffs and how difficult it was to get those. Whether or not that happened is different than whether or not the tariffs that Trump imposed and is looking to impose is correct. I mean, at the end of the day, long-term strategically, those could be the right things for the U.S. people. But without a doubt, and as Elon Musk said, to get to where we ultimately want to be, you have to have sacrifice, and there's going to be short-term pain.
Amen. I think that's an interesting observation. I'm not arguing that there won't be short-term pain. We need some short-term pain because the laziness of our leaders and the lack of will to do what's right is not sacrificing. We're screwing over the future generations by continuing this on because we're afraid of sacrificing a little bit. We got to go through some pain. It's not going to be immediate that the job's onshore. So there may be a period of time where some goods are more expensive. But in the long run, if it's going to be better for our economy, it's going to have more people working, less people on welfare, for example. In the long run, it's obviously better. And as far as the construction costs, yeah, in certain areas and sure, these things take time to work themselves out. This is why it's a national security threat, for example, of not being able to produce steel in our nation any longer. And when you tariff steel from outside sources, you go, oh, the cost of steel is going up. This is terrible. We can't build. Well, why did we not keep some steel production in our nation? If you're going to go to war and you can't even make the steel to make your planes and tanks and ships, you're a complete basket case. What I hate about the media is they make these things very narrowly focused on talking points and buzzwords and don't get deeper into what's going on. They treat us like fools. Any more on that topic you want to do?
No, I think we covered most of it.
All right. I want to go into Obama a little bit, only because I remember one time you suggested that Obama, kind of his response during that financial crisis was good, and he was really good for the economy. I hope I'm portraying that correctly.
Sure.
Sure, I think he was good for the economy for people that had money. I think the wealth gap in this nation has never been more extreme, and I think that when you have zero interest rates for the extended period of time that they did, all it did was allow people with assets to continue to leverage their money to make way more money, and God bless them, they're entitled. But for the guy that's just able to just save some shekels, put it in a savings account, and for 8-10 years couldn't make a cent. Whereas I remember my grandparents, they saved some money and they lived off their interest on some stuff. And I mean, that's not an exact example of why, the interest rate should be here or there, but I'm looking at it post those Obama policies, and it just seemed what it did was it increased the wealth gap. So I think it was good for some people. I don't think it was good for a lot of people. And now we have situations where you have, like, I'm going to try to talk about this topic in another show, that Luigi kid that assassinated the CEO. Now, is that appropriate? Of course not. But what we have to talk about is, why has this kid got so much angst in him that he thinks that's the appropriate action? And I think ignoring why that kid was upset is a detriment to our country. We don't want to have a revolution here where the people that have nothing get so put in a corner where they start...
Luigi had a lot. He went to an Ivy League school. I mean, I don't know if that's a good analogy necessarily.
Well, I would say if you look at most radicals in history, they came from upper middle class families, and they were filled with empty ideologies. It always is that case. I'm not glorifying Luigi. I'm just speaking to an example. He saw a problem in society, and I'd argue what he's recognizing is a legitimate problem. His cause for the problem, his way of fixing the problem, I think are completely off base. But let's get to the broader point. The wealth gap that evolved after Obama's policies. What is your view on that?
It sounds like a very loaded question, but you mentioned a few different things. You mentioned how I talked about that during the Great Financial Crisis, that his policies bailed us out. So the previous administration's policies put us into the crisis. Obama was thrust into inevitably what was the most difficult economic environment that the U.S. had experienced since the Great Depression.
And so my view is, yes, he bailed people out, but who did he bail out? He bailed out the financial institutions that put the country in this pickle. He didn't bail out the average U.S. taxpayer. He took from the average U.S. taxpayer to prop up a system. Now, whether that was the right call or not...
Well, hold on. I mean, what was the other option?
Again...
Because you're pointing fingers on one president, and I don't think that's fair. And I'm not saying I'm pro-Obama or anti-Obama, but it sounds like of Trump, who would have done the same exact thing and did the same exact thing during COVID to save effectively... There was no difference in policy. It was just throw money into the system and backstop failing institutions.
So again, I'm making a claim on the policy. And yeah, when the government says that caused the problem through their reckless policy, the financial crisis, look, I'm not a Bush fan per se. I'm not a Clinton fan per se. They both had policies that led us into that. That didn't happen overnight. It was lack of regulation and people doing really irresponsible things. It wasn't unforeseeable what happened. Now, I'm not saying what Obama did if he had another choice. I'm not even making that argument. I'm just saying when we say he bailed it out, he bailed out a system that screwed over a lot of people. Could you have let more fail and shake out? I don't know. Like, I'm someone that when you try to scare me, I'm not going to be motivated by that. I've been liberated by that. That'll go to our conversation on faith. I fear God and God alone. If you want to talk about patterns in history, when you have radical changes and radical limitations on people's freedoms, they're usually as a result of some kind of crisis, and the government steps in and saves us. I say that in quotation marks, like they did. So whether that was the right thing or not, that's not really the topic. I'm just making the observation, like, since those decisions were made, the wealth gap has increased to levels where it's never been so few people had so much of the wealth in our nation.
First of all, I don't agree with that. I think that if you look throughout history, there have been times where the wealth gap has been significantly higher.
Prior to, like, the antitrust laws that came in. Like, when you talk Rockefeller or...
Yeah, the robber barons, they effectively owned everything, and there was not much of a middle class back then. But you're right. I think that the wealth gap is a huge issue and one of our biggest issues in this country, because when the wealth gap gets as big as it is and continues to expand, that's what creates revolution.
Amen. A strong middle class is provides stability. Marxist ideology, communism, only grabs a hold when you have a people that's why it's never really worked here in the past, because there was enough people in a system that knew, you know what, if I just work hard, I'm going to be all right. I don't have to have the government, promise me a bunch of stuff. And this is this idea that if you worship the state and trust the state and give it all power, it'll make everything right. And we've talked about that in other episodes. I would imagine we're on the same page with that. You came out of a communist society and you saw the failures of it.
Yeah, absolutely. You need checks and balances.
We're going to go on to the next topic, globalism versus nationalism. I see the benefits of globalism in a sense of, I think that you see them, where when we're trading with each other and our economies are aligned, or not aligned, but they're reliant on each other, it removes the chance of war. Because we don't want to disturb business and we're both going to get hurt. There's like a lot of pain if we go to war and it involves a trading partner. So I see the benefit of that. Where I'm getting concerned, and we say these terms like free trade and tariff as opposed to free trade, we have a nation that essentially, there's no secret that they have a slave labor market. And the world has enjoyed cheap goods because of that slave labor. We exploit it. Now, I'm all for free trade, but my observation is if we're asking corporations to decide whether they create goods here where there's standards of labor as far as protections and costs, benefits, wages, and we're competing with a nation that doesn't have those, is that really free trade? And what is our moral obligation to not exploit these people any longer?
Yeah, I mean, those are all really good thoughts. I went to the University of Chicago, got my MBA, and that's a school that's steeped in globalism and free trade. And I remember taking classes in macroeconomics and talking about the benefits of free trade. And, I think you could be on many parts of that spectrum between free trade and isolationism and somewhere in between. And maybe in my younger years, I was much more towards full-on absolute free trade because there's a lot of benefits to it, right? Economically, there's definitely a lot of benefits. It's the reason why we've had so much growth in the U.S. because we've been able to offshore a lot of the more less technical aspects of what drives our economy and what keeps inflation low, and onshore more of the service industry and technology parts of what has driven the growth in our economy. But if you kind of look at it and where we're at now, there's a lot of things strategically as a nation that we have to think about. To your point about manufacturing steel and who does that now globally and how that could impact going to war, creating very key strategic things for our country, whether it's buildings, infrastructure, or armaments. You look back at history and you look at what the U.S. was able to do and effectively arm the entire world during World War II under FDR. I mean, that's because we had the manufacturing. So there's a lot to think about that and doing it strategically. And I think we went a little bit too far to the free trade side, and using strategic tariffs to rebalance that is the right way to do it. And to your point about China and using slave labor, I think that's a problem, right? That's not necessarily free trade. That's subsidized. They're subsidizing certain economies through free labor.
Yeah, so actually you touched on some things that are interesting and things I've noticed. So at the college level, that's what was promulgated, and I get it. And I think it is very good for a certain section of the economy to do what we did. Now, like my grandfather came here from Italy, and he was able to raise a family of 4 working at a cookie factory. Mm-hmm. Okay, a job like he had no high school education, he had no college education. He was a hard worker. He wasn't a dummy, right? There's a lot of people that don't go to high school. They're not dummies. They just didn't get educated in certain areas. Do they have the capacity? Of course. And you put them on a job site, whatever you need the job to be done, they have the capacity to learn it. But that job doesn't exist anymore. The people making the policy are making the assumption that everyone in the economy is like them. And we need more jobs that I could fill. But we need jobs that all could fill. And free trade, I think inherently free trade works when it's not a rigged system. And inherently, if you have slave labor in one nation, the system's broken. It's not free trade. Free trade, I think an underlying assumption of free trade is that all the labor in the system has to have some minimum standard of rights. And then you could see what free trade is.
That's definitely the ethical way of doing it. I mean, free trade is just a way of certain goods being manufactured to flow to countries where they're produced the cheapest. But you're right. I mean, ethically, we shouldn't be buying goods from countries or certain goods that are being produced by slave labor.
This is actually going to lead us wonderfully into part 2. We're going to break this up into 2 episodes because the next one's going to go more into philosophy, worldview, religion. You just said it's might be the ethical way. And it's exactly the point. Is our society rooted in any kind of moral ethic? Should ethics and morals have any dictation on what we do? Hey, you know what? The slaves are making my stuff at a good price. I'm fine with it. And it's out of sight, out of mind. That's the way it is for most of the nation. But where do our morals come from? Is it just a figment of our imagination? I think we only have that standard if there is a God. But I'll let you go with the last word, and this is going to lead us in part 2. of our conversation.
Sure. I mean, you threw a lot on my last word, and there's a lot to talk about. I mean, I completely disagree that ethics are based on some divine power that has bestowed certain rules and commandments to the human race. I think that ethics come from within, and it is something that humans have created to distinguish what's right and what's wrong. Clearly, there's a gray area to certain things, but I don't think you need an all-powerful God to live a virtuous or moral life.
So I guess I lied. I'm going to have one more question for you. Given your worldview, should we exploit slave labor in China or not?
Absolutely not. We should not exploit slave labor in China, but I think the question is much more complex because I think that the U.S. Population has grown accustomed to living off of goods that are made very inexpensively.
So why do you think we have done that and decided to do that?
Because likely it has to do with big business and corporate profits.
Of course. But if those big businesses and corporate profits acknowledge the God that said this is immoral, or acknowledge the good, you forget God, acknowledge what was good, would they have arrived at those conclusions?
I mean, I think there's been numerous examples throughout history where religion has ruled and has been extremely corrupt.
And I agree 100%. And this is going to lead us great to the next one, the difference between man-made religion and a logical conclusion that there must be a God. Thanks for joining us. Hope you had a good time. Talk to you soon. Thanks for joining us for another episode. I hope I got you thinking and out of your comfort zone. Believe me, the biggest fear your government has is a population that is thinking and talking to one another. So get out there, take a risk, start a conversation, make a friend, and reason with each other. Share the show with someone who you think needs to hear it. I wish you peace and love.